Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the culture with our two legal experts, Royce Russell Esquire and Edward Pichado Esquire, and myself, Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. Thank you for tuning in, being a part of the show. Pray that you are staying well and safe out there as spring looks like it's finally sprung a little bit on the East Coast. We've been having some interesting weather, but hope wherever you are doing well as we have another packed show with a lot that is on the top of the news cycles. But before we get into that and our intel from our legal experts, let's let them greet you. Mr. Russell, how are you doing today?
I am doing fine despite the gray skies. Blessed to be standing on my 2 feet. Every day is a good day above ground. Welcome the audience to Speaking Legally once again. You can catch us all the time, every time, where the legal and the cultural meets. All right, welcome.
Thank you. And Senor Pichado, buenas tardes.
Hola, buenas tardes. Good afternoon, mi gente. Welcome to the show today. We got some very interesting topics. The news cycle has been packed, and I'm sure you're going to find the information to be quite educational, spiritually fulfilling, as well as enlightening. So stay tuned, folks. It's coming.
Oh, it's going to be spiritual fulfilling because, the word out here is people are mad on the streets.
Oh, yeah. No question, no doubt.
Yeah, it's a lot going on, but let's start with a story that I think we hinted towards that it was coming, or the sentence was coming out, and Kid Creole sentenced 16 years for the fatal 2017 stabbing of a homeless man. This story, I don't know. What say you? Where the legal meets the cultural, this is a little
Well,
disturbing.
this is definitely the cultural and the legal meeting, right? Because he was a cultural icon, right? You can't talk about hip hop and DJing and Grandmaster Flash and Bambaataa and hip hop starting in the Bronx and the whole nine without covering Kid Creole. You know what I mean? Made a Soul, right? Something like that. He used to have a little rhyme like that. I mean, like, this is history in the makings and how far we have fallen. I don't know the particular facts of his case, but now you're looking at a sentence, or he was sentenced to 16 years. And I can tell you in these prisons now, they're not too fond of history, right? History is lost on them. So I just hope he can find a safe space and, do his time quietly and don't become subject to any violence during his term of incarceration.
Yeah, apparently there was some self-defense that was shared and some mental health challenges. So it's a lot wrapped up in the case, and ultimately a life is lost and two lives are affected because while he physically is here, as you had said before in a previous show, being sentenced and spending time is losing the freedom of your life. So there's no good way around a story like this. And we send out condolences to the family of the gentleman that was killed and to Kid Creole's fans and family who are sorry to hear such disturbing news.
Yes, indeed.
And we have someone else in the news that we also talked about when it came to what's happening with the ballot. And hey, Kevin, thank you for tuning in. Oh, you're showing off, Kevin. He's tuning in from Grenada.
Okay,
Definitely
okay.
enjoy some sunshine for us while you're out there. But appreciate you being here and all of our regulars. But this story we talked about in detail when it came to what the governor was going to do regarding Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin, who had to subsequently resign. He will not be on the New York ballot. So, what say you about this?
Well, we discussed a bill that had been put forth to allow him to be removed without him having to suffer death or move out of the state. Or the third scenario would be if he was nominated to another political office, which obviously is not happening right now. So, at first, the legislature was balking at going ahead and passing this bill. In fact, I believe that the leader of the Senate, Andrea Stewart Cousins, just had qualms about, changing, quote unquote, the rules in the middle of an election. But I think that the rationale switched to, well, this is something that would be good for the voters. It's unfair to have him on the ballot when clearly he's not intending on occupying the office. If, God forbid, he would have gotten elected, or folks would have said, well, listen, I'm voting for Hochul, so I have to vote for him, and would have, it would have been a situation where, he elected but not not planning to occupy the office. So the legislature went ahead and passed it. Oh, hello. The legislature went ahead and passed it. The governor signed it, and she immediately appointed Antonio Delgado, who is a congressman in the Hudson Valley Capital District, Catskills area of New York State. First Black or Latino to be elected upstate as a congressperson, believe it or not. We have a very diverse congressional delegation here in New York, but for in the case of Delgado, for the most part, almost all of them come from downstate, New York City, really. And he was the first, and now he's going to become the lieutenant governor. And, listen, some of Hochul's opponents were claiming, oh, you didn't vet properly, or else you wouldn't have picked Brian Benjamin. So what did Sister Hochul do? She went overboard with the vetting. She said, you know what? I'm going to pick me another brother who is, Harvard grad, Colgate undergrad, played basketball there, a litigator from international law firm, former litigator Aiken Gump. I mean, when you look at brother Antonio Delgado's record, you say, damn, this is.
But that's not doing Brian Benjamin any justice when people say stuff.
Listen,
like
it wasn't.
Not reference to this.
Qualified or well regarded
I'm not.
credential. Just saying that, hey, you know what? We're gonna do it again, and then what, so.
Well, I mean, look, they should be able to do it again, because there's more than one Black person that went to Fordham Prep, right? And there's more than one Black person that went to Harvard. So I mean, this shouldn't be, it's news, but it ain't really news, because we know what our community is full of, right? And we know that there's plenty of Dominican brothers, Latino brothers, African.
Well, he's Puerto Rican, actually. He's one of our Boricua brothers.
Puerto
and he's
Rican,
also Cape Verdean too. He has Cape Verdean roots too.
Look, I don't know when people started getting so much into the division of who they are and what they are. If you lived in St. Mary's, you were a minority, and we for you. You do what you got to do, right? I mean, at the end of the day. And so depending upon what side of earth you're on, people determine who you are culturally just by sight. So, I mean, look, there's plenty of bright, brilliant, talented 10th people out here to choose from. There's no way she could have even got into, the type of vetting that would be necessary for someone to reveal what Brian Benjamin has been indicted for. But I also understand the pragmatic reason for removing him from the ballot, because there are, if your ears are to the street, if your ears are to the ground, there are people out here that's saying, you know what, we got our first Black lieutenant governor, and look, this is what happens. They're picking on him, or look what happens. They came after him. And, we ain't too far from being a people of principle. A matter of fact, we are people of principle. So there could have been a large contingency just voting for him just because, even though he wouldn't take position. I know it sounds crazy, but we have done crazier things as a people. So it was necessary.
And by the way, where the legal meets the cultural, brother, I was reading about Brother Delgado here, and he actually has a rap album from back in 2007 where he was rapping under the stage name AD The Voice. So I'm gonna try to see if I can find that album and listen to some of his bars.
Well, I better tell you, one thing.
And see, how proficient he is on the mic.
And Hoku better have listened to that rap record all day and all night, because the last thing you need is something to pop out on that.
Yes, indeed.
And by the way, this brother's I believe he's a Rhodes Scholar too. So, let's stay watch. Let's keep our eyes. Yep. David Patterson, first black. Oh, okay, yeah, under Spitzer. Yeah, he's correct.
Yes, indeed. So thank you, Jesse. Hey, Roland. Thank you for tuning in. So at least we see that we're still being represented, and she was intentional about who her running mate would be as lieutenant governor. And of course, we said that Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin is innocent until proven guilty. So we'll still hold that space and hope that Lieutenant Governor Delgado to be, with a successful ticket, will also add value to serving the citizens of this great state of New York. So as we transition now into more of where the legal meets the cultural, Kevin said that rap recording was an issue in his last election.
Oh, really?
Okay. See, here we go. You don't started it now. We don't started it now.
Well,
all right. So next week we're gonna do Speaking Legally, and the story's gonna be Ed Squeals. There's gonna be something out there. Keep it close. Keep it close to the vest, Jesus. Keep it close to the vest.
Squealed on him. I snitched.
Well, let's hope that whatever came up the last time, they can put it to rest. So there's no more. And these are distractions, and let's get to what's at hand and let the electorate make the choice that's best for the state. But now back to where the legal meets the cultural. There is a news story for those of you who know about the Tulsa Massacre, that a judge rules that the Tulsa Massacre lawsuit seeking reparations can proceed.
Yeah, the reason why this is ultimately important is because we always talk about atonement in America, and we've heard, and we constantly hear this term of reparations. Repaying of the wrongs, and mostly we hear it from a monetary perspective. But there's other ways to do that, right? Making sure you have certain lands, making sure you're given certain lands, making sure school is right in certain areas, and districting and redistricting. But in this particular case, the reason why this is of high importance is because when you talk about the judge ruling, he's dismissing a motion to dismiss. So what do we do on Speaking Legally? We educate first, right? So what is a motion to dismiss? So you have the survivors of the Tulsa Massacre, 1921, and that is a massacre where Black Wall Street area in Oklahoma, where Black folks were surviving and thriving, owning hotels, owning businesses, just at the highest peak of economic success and cultural pride. And what happened was that allegedly, I'm going to use that term, a Black man touched the arm of a white woman, and all hell broke loose. And that is the only way to really explain it, And next thing you know, you had the burning of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and you had riots, and you had gunfire, and 300 people were dead at the end of the day. What is interesting about it is that you had World War I vets, Black World War I vets, that took arms and were going to stand up for this brother, right? And was going to make sure not on their watch. And so you had the massacre. And so there were the defendants in this case trying to have the lawsuit dismissed for reparations, suing for reparations, survivors, the three survivors, suing for what would have been rightfully theirs. If you look at the economic chain and what happened to them, and the devastation that they suffered economically. And so the court said, you know what? Defendant, Oklahoma, defendant. No, we're not dismissing this case. We're allowing this case to move forward. And a motion to dismiss usually comes when there is no issues of fact. That means there is no issue of he was wearing red or he was wearing blue. We all agree on the facts. And there's only issues of law to be decided by the judge. And based upon the issue of law decided under this motion to dismiss, the case should be dismissed for either failure to state a cause of action, or even if stating a cause of action, it still shouldn't go forward. So this is huge that a court felt that no, this case should go forward and that we should proceed. We should proceed with a trial. And usually in these type of cases, that means settlement. And if that means settlement, that means reparation for those who survived. It is really, really, really important to understand that we should keep our eye on this case all day and every day. Because as we said before, first is the conversation about, and it is the rejection. And then after a period of time, it becomes success. And this could be an avenue of success, like we see in Chicago, Evanston, where they have reparations built into taxes to make sure folks that were treated poorly, receive some money back.
And just to be clear, we're not sure if the city of Tulsa is going to turn around and try to file an appeal of this denial of the motion to dismiss to see if an appellate court will decide differently. The judge in this case was District Judge Caroline Wall. She's the one who denied this motion to dismiss. The principal claims here, I believe, are under a public nuisance claim, which basically involves the interference of a right that the general public would have. I'm kind of, I haven't really dug my fingers into this case. I would have imagined this would have gotten tossed on statute of limitations, but I'm not sure how they were able to get around that, given the amount of time that has passed in this case. I hope that the parties reach a reasonable settlement. They're asking for financial reparations, in my understanding, as well as a 99-year tax holiday or some sort of abatement for the residents and the survivors of those families. I believe it's about 300 of them. The plaintiffs are actual survivors. I believe 2 of them are 107, one of them 99 years old. Hopefully they don't pass away before the conclusion of this case and they live to see the fruits of this litigation passed on to their descendants. This is big because there were many of these tragedies around the country. I remember seeing a map a few years ago littered, all over the United States of the various similar massacres that occurred out, beyond Tulsa, talking about, in Florida, I believe Rosewood, and then other communities all over the country. So, this hopefully will set the precedent, the blueprint for, other similar tragedies to be ameliorated for future generation. Because, I believe I saw a documentary sometime back of the effect that the Tulsa massacre in Oklahoma had on that community decades later, in terms of the inability to redevelop,
and I would say that what you just spoke of, the effect, is probably how they got around the statute of limitations.
In terms of a continuing
damage,
damages, continuing. There's that continuing theory in the law that my damage or the offense didn't just happen on this day to continue to happen
over generations and generations, and that's easily sought. You can see that. I mean, it'll never be the same. But one of the things that we can glean from this, and we should glean from this, is that we as a people can be successful in the most restrictive, confined, hostile environments ever.
Mm-hmm.
And we should never stop, and we should always recognize that, right? And when you look at this, and you can't look at it in a microcosm, you got to look at it in a macro, right? We talk about environmental racism, right? Environmental racism, what is that about? That's about, it's about some part of it is redlining, most of it is about industrialization, and these places where rubbish is being held, and where the community is over industrialized, and the oil tanks and the rigs go through certain communities. And when I say certain, I mean our community, communities of color.
And I
Not
believe there's a controversy in New Jersey right now, I think in Newark, regarding that.
yes, just mountains of rubbish you see around. And in some of the rural areas, in your Tennessees, in your Alabamas, in your Mississippis,
Flint,
and Michigan, even Flint with the water. You say, well, why are the pipes being drilled through this community? Yeah, because black folks live there, and they not speak up, and we're not worried about their health, even to the point where, you know, Department of Environment, I was reading one, I was actually watching one show that spoke to this, where studies after study, Department of Environmental Agency was saying that this particular area where African Americans live, the rates of cancer was 3, 4, 5, 100 times over any other place. But yet, business as usual. And so folks that are still striving in their community and still doing well, as we saw with Tulsa, but it's an injustice. It's ridiculous. And we need to keep our eye on that all day, every day.
And I want to just commend Attorney Demario Solomon Simmons for moving forward with this case. Working hard, and hopefully, he's able to get a good outcome for his clients.
Well, the truth of the matter is, when we talk about who represents you, who's in positions of power, this was even true back then, because the reckoning for this and what it was, it took how many years for it even to be acknowledged as a massacre. It triggers so much for our community when we listen to stories like this, because it's a reminder of inequities. And to your point, Attorney Pichardo, we're so glad that the attorney pressed forward and continued to push, and that we're at a point where, even though only a few are still living, that their generations and future generations can look forward to justice. It's not over yet. They're just starting, but at least we can raise and amplify the voice of injustice that has been a consistent thread throughout what has happened in our country. It's some parts of the unfortunate truth that we don't always want to acknowledge, and that creates other conditions that have come as a result of this. So this is where the legal meets the cultural. This is something that our children should know about and learn, that in spite of, to Mr. Russell's point earlier, everything that we went through, we built thriving communities. We did what was allotted to us, and I put up the air quotes, to be independent, to be self-sufficient, to have access and opportunity, and that was burned down in one reckless night of arson. And
let me mention something. I mean, I heard one commentator say, because most people refer to Tulsa at that time as the Black Wall Street. He said, I'd like to call it the Black Main Street, because this was something that not only were those who were well-heeled in that community benefiting from, but your ordinary Black person as well, in terms of employment and services. And I say that to say only that right now they were interviewing, I believe, the mayor, and he was talking about how many members of the majority, white community are like, oh man, you opened up this Pandora's box. What are you doing? And he was talking about how some are complaining that they're going to have to levy an additional tax to pay for all of this. And it's just to say, that moral interest, doing the right thing sometimes it raises some really ugly things with respect to people. Instead of looking at the dollars, let's look at the decency here. They are still digging up bodies that were never properly buried because of this massacre throughout that community. Instead of people complaining about the cost, they should just be looking at doing what's morally right. And in fact, this mayor said to one of his fellow white residents, well, what if your family member had been murdered and nobody had been held to account, or you never got an explanation as to why? Wouldn't you want to know? And that person got quiet because we're talking about doing the right thing here.
And you're also going to find people being quiet on the reality of the burden it takes for this brother comrade in law to take on this case.
That's right.
There's no $1,500 an hour. There's no $500 an hour. There's no $300 hourly rate. This is straight off the skin of this brother's back and time, and hoping that something in the future can happen. He might get paid from the court. He might be able to get attorney fees, but it's not a conclusion. It is not over. The clients that he's representing in this, they're not paying him hourly. I can almost bet you that on every dollar I got in my pocket, that's not the case. And he's carrying this burden. He's carrying this weight day in, day out, looking for the next shoe to drop, and so thankful that the case can move on, because hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel. And he's waiting for the appeals to happen, because he knows that the appeal will probably happen, because decency is not in that vocabulary over there, because they rather get a decision that says to throw this case out than be decent and do what's right.
So we will definitely continue to watch this story unfold, but this is part of the reason why you also have to have those who look like you, have had your experience, represent you, and having attorneys that will take on these righteous fights. And it's not always about the dollar, but about the righteousness of the cause. So definitely kudos to that attorney. And we're going to move into our next topic, which is our Amazon workers vote against New York Union Drive, led by a grassroots organization behind last month's win. So this is an interesting conversation when we talk about the labor union and the young brothers that are leading this movement.
Yeah, just so folks understand here, this is the Amazon Labor Union. They are not part of a larger union. They're not affiliated with the Teamsters. They're not affiliated, say, with SEIU or the Transport Workers Union, or, these workers decided to form their own union. And not to say that major unions haven't been trying to organize. I believe there's one of the major unions, AFL-CIO affiliated, has been trying to organize the Amazon plan in Bessemer, Alabama, and have not been, quite frankly, successful. In fact, I believe a month or two ago, the last election they had was too close to call, and now the NLRB is reviewing the ballots, taking objections, and they may have to call for another election. But pushing that aside, this is about, as many of you will probably recall, I believe it was last month, Amazon workers had a major win at a facility at JFK Airport, which is referred to as JFK 8, which has about 8,000 workers. And Brother Smalls here, the guy pictured here, he is actually a worker that was actually terminated by Amazon, and decided to, instead of just walking away, helping organize and lead these workers, and they were actually able to vote in the union. Now, what does that mean? What happens is that, and by the way, this article is about them having a setback. There was a vote at a plant in Staten Island with much less workers, about 900 something workers. They had a vote. 618 of those workers voted no. 380 voted yes. And now For now, they will not be represented by a union. Not sure if Amazon Labor Union is filing objections to that election. I know they are. The report is that they're asking for a do-over. They must be alleging some sort of misconduct on the part of the employer that affected that election. So stay tuned there. But just for the edification of the audience, what happens is that under the National Labor Relations Act, every worker has the right to seek to be represented by a union. Now, what does that mean? What happens is that if you are a worker and you're able to find at least 30% of your fellow workers that are interested in forming a union to be able to bargain, to contract, to negotiate with the boss, the employer, the company, then what happens is that you organize. You hand out what's called authorization cards. It's these cards that are made up saying, I want to join the union, and you sign your name. What happens is once you get those cards are then presented to what's called the National Labor Relations Board. That is the government agency that's in charge of enforcing the National Labor Relations Act. And once that agency is presented with those cards, they then contact the employee and they say, hey, listen, you got about 30% of your workforce that wants to form a union. The word join is, if the union is already in existence here, they form their own union. So, and the word in the statute is form. Join, form also. So the National Labor Relations Board gets in contact with the employer. They ask for a list of that company's employees. They match up the cards with the list of employees and say, okay, we see that these cards match to workers at that place. Okay, cool. What happens next? What happens next is, of course, the employer gets to challenge that assertion. They get to challenge whether or not those were collected legally, whether they're authentic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, mind you that the names of the workers who decided to join are kept confidential to protect them from retaliation. However, what happens at that legal step is at that point, that employer is no longer allowed to, let's say, do mass firings or close down the plant and to prevent a union from being formed. They aren't allowed to do that. What happens, they get to file some objections concerning those authorization cards, but at that point, those workers are allowed to proceed to a vote. And what happens is that then the National Labor Relations Board sets up a polling place at that job site. It may be, a couple of different job sites. There's also, I forgot to mention this, sometimes the company will object to what is being characterized as the bargaining unit. They may say, listen, all of these workers don't have the same interests. The warehouse workers don't have the same interests as the drivers, and so they shouldn't be in the same union or being allowed to form the exact same union. And those are fights that occur at the National Labor Relations Board, legal fights. That's where the lawyers step in and make their arguments. And ultimately, an administrative law judge at the National Labor Relations Board makes a determination as to what comprises the exact bargaining unit, what workers have similar interests, and so forth. All that aside, a vote then takes place. And that's what we're talking about here. And at least a majority, more than 50%, 51% say, have to decide that they want the union. Once that vote takes place, now the union comes in and the employer is legally compelled to engage in good faith collective bargaining negotiations with that union. Now, what is the union? The union is a body, an entity that those workers have decided they want to represent their interests. We want the union to speak on our behalf. We want the union to go sit down with the boss and figure out how much we should get paid. How many days off should we get? What is our health insurance supposed to look like? Does the employer pay for all of it? Do the workers pay for some of it? Is there a pension plan? All of those things are discussed by the union. Days off, uniform allowances, holidays, vacations, terms and conditions of employment. That's what this is about. Some people say, well, why should I join a union? I could do that myself. I can go in there and talk to the boss and figure out, what I need to be paid and how much. Really? You, one worker, gonna go in there and talk to the big old boss? Right. That's why people form unions, because they figure in unity and numbers there is strength. Now, you got a lot of people who are unhappy with their union. They say, hey, listen, I don't like my union. They're not really doing their job. Well, that union is also governed under the National Labor Relations Act, which says, and the Labor Management Reporting Act, the LMRA, which governs how unions are supposed to be running. That may be for another show.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The union is supposed to have elections, regular elections. Members are supposed to be allowed to vote in those elections as long as they're paying their dues, right?
Oh, let me you stop right there. That's what piques my ear right there. All of this sounds very altruistic. We want to have a union. We want to have somebody represent me. We want this. We want people to, is power in numbers. But what oftentimes you hear, and I'm not weighing an opinion, is that, and we know this to be true, is that it costs money. So you got to pay into this. And when you pay into a union, you have rights, that you have expectations, right? And what we often hear as attorneys is that the union is not doing what I want them to do. And a matter of fact, they're part of management.
Well, and that's the thing. That's why you have union elections where workers get to select their representatives. If you don't feel that the leadership of the union is doing their job, you vote them out. Mm-hmm. That's what you do. You also have other legal remedies, of course, and we could, like I said, we could talk about that, because there's situations where just you as an individual aren't getting represented properly, and there's a legal recourse for that, but there's a high burden there. But the bottom line is you don't get something for nothing. All of this costs money. These unions, they have to hire attorneys. Who do you think is the attorneys that they have hired to make arguments before the National Labor Relations Board and possibly even going to court beyond that? That costs money. And that's dues. That's when you hear that the union has the health and welfare funds, because those union funds, if enough workers belong to that union and they're paying dues, the more powerful that union is, the more resources they have. They take that money and they put it in a trust fund. All of this is legal, by the way. ERISA and so forth. You can't. The union president can't just take the funds and run out to Hawaii. You hear those stories. Sometimes they happen, sometimes they don't. But there's laws against that. The bottom line is what most of the time when these workers are trying to form these unions, one of the biggest things that they hear from the employer is, listen, they just want to take your money. They just want you to pay dues, and you're not going to get anything out of it. Trust me. Look at these pictures. These are the union representatives at the big convention partying and so forth, But, there's another side to that. There's a whole nother side to that. Then you got the other stories about the person who was about to get fired and went to the union, and the union said, nah, no way, you can't. Where's the proof?
And save the job.
Yeah, and save their jobs, because once, there's a labor contract in place, there's usually a due process when it comes to your firing. You're no longer what's quote unquote considered an at-will employee where the employer can fire you for no, for little to no reason, simply because, hey, listen, I want to fire 300 people because, I don't want to continue to pay all these people. And, you have certain rights. You have the ability to say, no, you can't just fire me. Now, I'm not saying that the union can prevent a company which is no longer profitable and force them to continue to exist by virtue of the fact that they have a labor contract. That's not what I'm talking about. There's a history of, companies going under and saying, hey, listen, or they'll negotiate with the union and say, listen.
So we have a question from Roland before we go into our last story. He said, if I'm not mistaken, depending on the state, a person can opt out of paying membership dues and opt out of a union, yet are entitled to what a union was able to negotiate. So that's another.
Those are what's called. Yeah, those are what's called the right to work states. A lot of them exist in the South, very conservative places where they want to allow workers to get something for nothing. In my opinion, my humble opinion, I'm a labor lawyer, union side. I don't think it's right for you to be at a workplace benefiting from the wages that the union was able to negotiate, the benefits, and not pay any dues. That's like,
I think that's a whole nother show. We might have to go into some more about the labor union pro con, just for information, because this is where legal meets the cultural, and we have a lot of our community who are union employees and have benefited. So to be continued. Interesting story though with Amazon. I want to definitely see how that continues to play out, because there is a lot of press around what's happening with unions. But before we close out, this is the last topic of the day, a major one that is rallying the cry of many across the country with this Supreme Court ruling, leak, all the different things that have come out about Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, so this is Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization in the state of Mississippi.
The only black-run abortion facility in Mississippi. As a matter of fact, I believe, if my information is correct, is the only one run in Mississippi. And this
because they've run all the rest of them out of the state.
That's right.
They recently passed a law setting, it's called the 2018 Gestational Age Act, where the law bans abortions past the 15-week threshold. The Jackson Women's Health Organization sued and was able to obtain an injunction of the enforcement of that law, and was able to obtain that in the federal district court, the trial court, the first level court in the federal system. This is important for the audience to hear, because right after that, the state of Mississippi appeals and the case goes to the Fifth Circuit. And remember, we talked about in the federal system, it goes by circuits, right? So here in New York, we have the Second Circuit. Down there in Mississippi, it's the Fifth Circuit. That's their appellate court on the federal system down there. What happens at the Fifth Circuit? Not only does that court, the Fifth Circuit, say, we're going to go with that trial court judge and we're going to continue this injunction, right? This law is not constitutional in wake of Roe v. Wade and Casey.
It's overburdensome. It's changing the Constitution, and we're not going to stand for it.
And not only that, what I was getting to too was there was also another heartbeat law that got passed in Mississippi that they also said no to that one too. That, if there's a heartbeat, then there's life, no abortion. Even earlier, that can happen conceivably even earlier than the 15 weeks. That same Fifth Circuit court said no to that one too. So what happens next? Mississippi says, you know what? Our friend Donald Trump and other Republicans before him have stuffed the Supreme Court with conservatives, so we're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. Forget about what these other two courts said. And what happens? They got Justice Alito up there, and he joined with his friend Clarence Thomas and apparently Kavanaugh,
Cooney,
Amy Coney
Gershwish, you name it. They got it all together. All
and so the gang of five got together and they said, you know what? We're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And you know what? We can overturn previous decisions the same way Plessy versus Ferguson got overturned after so many
That's
years.
right. That's right. And I think it's important to recognize, we always talk about, the trickle down effect, right? And you may have looked at the confirmations and said, like, look, that's nothing of importance for the Supreme Court confirmations. It doesn't really have to deal with me in my direct life. But now you see the domino effect. When you look at 23.8%, around about that number, are black women that are having abortions versus white women that's somewhere around about 6-7%. You can see how it can affect your mother, your loved one, your sister, your niece, anyone that's in your family that's of female descent, right? You can see how this impacts you directly. And on top of that, we're talking about looking at the Constitution. And whenever you're talking about looking at the Constitution, people of color have to be very, 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 very cautious and very, very alert. Because what are you saying? What are you redoing? What are you restructuring in the Constitution? Is it for my benefit? And here the court is saying, hey, wait a minute, the Constitution doesn't even speak to abortion. Like, where do we come? There's no right that you see anywhere in the Constitution that even speaks to it. So let's give it back to the states. Let the people, now they say let's give it back to the states, but they disguise it as let the people make their own decisions, which sounds great, right? Why have this big government make a decision for me? I can live in a state and make my own decision. And we know that is going to be disastrous, right? It's supposed to be United States of America. There's nothing united about it. Each state doing their own thing. When it comes down to this issue, it's going to create chaos.
Well, it's funny because people talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, except when it comes to a woman deciding what to do with her own body, right? What's telling is that this actual law does not deal with instances of incest or rape, right?
Without a question, right? Skips right over it.
It's absolutely disgraceful. They also mentioned that Alito mentions in this decision that was leaked, right? That was leaked, where he mentions in there the fact, or not the fact, but the argument, or I don't want to dismiss fact because I have heard some historical accounts that some of the original bases for abortion was to reduce the population of African Americans who were, considered to be having, too many children, whatever that is the case. But the bottom line, I don't think anyone can deny that if something like this is allowed to go down and becomes widespread throughout the country, it will limit the opportunity of women of color, primarily poor women of all races, from having access to health, to this medical procedure. White, well-heeled, rich women will continue to have the ability to go to their private doctors and get this done when their families at the society club or the country club do not want to, somehow stain their family name, which is what was happening, early in the century, and they want to return it to that now. I mean, it's
here's another chilling effect. Here's this other chilling effect that can work for people of color and work for us, is that we start picking up the pens and the papers and we start actively voting as we advocate all the time. We start making sure our voices are heard. We start, you want the state to run this. You want people for the people, by the people deciding, then this is what we need to do. I'm not for it. I'm saying that if this is the card, once again, we have risen to the occasion in more restraints and more hostile environments than we can ever even imagine. And you could look at this as one of those scenarios. If this goes the way it's going to go, because it sure looks like it's going to go that way, then there needs to be that revolution that speaks to, you're not getting in power. We're not voting for you. This is what we're doing. And the reason why, I want us to really pay close attention to it, because it's abortion today, it's voting rights, you name it. Encroachment is happening very easily. And we always say it starts with conversation. This is not the first attempt that conservatives have reaching this level. They've been trying and trying and trying and trying, and now they have arrived.
And just and I think what my colleague is properly alluding to is the next level in this fight that has been discussed is dealing with this from a legislative perspective, because certainly, Justice Alito is claiming let's return this to the states, or if the federal Congress decides that they want to establish this and protect this as a right, then they need to legislate it. Of course, that's easier said than done, right? We don't have the votes, certainly not in the Senate. And the idea of being able to legislate this right now is not within, is not within reality, unless of course the public engages, reacts, and decides,
That's right.
What? We want
That's
these
right.
conservatives out of here.
That's what's happening.
We believe that women have a right to choose, and so we're going to make it so by getting the folks out of there who are preventing us from choosing. Now, I do want to mention, for the edification of the public, that speaking of states, New York State, back in 2019, it passed the Reproductive Health Act in New York, which codifies Roe v. Wade and protects women's access to abortions. So this is not something that we
Connecticut and New Jersey has done the same. And what you're going to see, and I'm sorry to cut you, what you're going to see is what we saw with immigration, these sanctuary states, right? You can only go be at certain places. You can only stay at certain places. And this is what is going to happen. And it will be a country divided.
It will be. And Kevin made a good point about going back to the unfortunate days of butchers performing botched abortions. People's lives are in jeopardy. This is so serious when it comes to what we talk about on Speaking Legally. If you're not engaged in the process, if you're not a part of casting a vote to elect the right people to be in position, not only to serve in their elected position, but to be in other positions where they're the ones that are going to carry forth nominations and putting people in certain judicial positions. This is why it's important to add this conversation to all of the other areas of your life that you pay attention to, because it does affect our community. And as we say all the time, if America catches a cold, Black and brown people get pneumonia. So this is it's just unbelievable what we're witnessing. And the protests are starting and people are galvanizing across the country with outcry for this overturning of Roe v. Wade.
And I just want to mention, the idea of these butchers isn't a far-flung thought. I mean, just recently I've been reading and hearing about all of these fake doctors performing plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery on women's bodies, and women dying, being driven and thrown in the driveway of emergency rooms by individuals who claim to have medical expertise. I would imagine in some of these states, you're going to have all sorts of nefarious individuals cropping up telling you, oh yeah, I could do you an abortion, or here, drink this and that should take care of it. And desperate women trying to figure out a way, subjecting their bodies to this. So, this is definitely an absolute concern to be had.
You brought up a point that the law doesn't really speak to, right? We have out here in the world the morning after pill.
Mhm.
What is the law speaking to as far as that is concerned, right?
Well, I
How
remember.
how drilled down will the law become in I guess interfering with that, right? That is that. I mean, look, I don't know the answer to it, but I can tell you one thing: when you start dealing with big pharmaceutical companies, we know their names, and you start dealing with their profit margin and their stocks, and America's a business. It's a business. It is. I mean, it is what it is, right?
that
If
that
we're
that
not, we're going to do A, then we're going to go to B.
I
There's a lot
believe
of
that
gray that's still out here.
I believe that has come up during this discussion. I remember some months back, some of these same states that are passing these restrictive laws were also looking to try to ban um, online mailing, ordering, etc. of these medications as well, because they want to have complete control over these women's bodies. This stuff about 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 24 weeks. This is just a ruse at the end of the day.
Right,
Just make
right.
no mistake about it. This has nothing to do with, because Alito talks about the viability issue is ridiculous. And what do I mean by viability? That, well, once that fetus gets to a certain point, then it's it equates to a human being. I think that's really at the end of the day, just a ruse at the end of the day. It's really at the end of the day all about controlling healthcare decisions, and that's what the conversation has to return to.
And we hope that all of the advocates, we see pictured here, some speaking out, and of course here in New York, a lot of our elected officials have added their voice to the outcry, and across the country, we are seeing this addressed. I just want to see what actually comes of this, because it is financial too, to a certain extent. So I want to see how a lot of these varying reactions come up, but I'm most concerned about the lives that can be lost unnecessarily because of turning back the hands of time with such a ruling. But
I mean, the reason why, Dr. Grant, the reason why I bring it up is that we've seen wars go on that have financial incentives, not because what you're fighting for, but because war exists. And certain people have defense contracts, and certain vice presidents have interest in certain defense contracts and certain equipment and things of that nature. So it's not far fetched.
yep, it's not.
It's right on point.
Well, we will continue to follow this as we do all of the issues that affect us as a country and globally, but more particularly culturally. So I want to thank our legal experts for their insight and feedback regarding a lot of what we see at the top of the news cycle right now, and it continues to evolve. The point is, stay engaged, be a part of change. Support those organizations that stay on the ground advocating and bringing resources and information to those that require it. And, Senor Pichardo and I still feel hope springs eternal. It might be a little difficult in days like this, but because of advocacy, information, exposure, we can make changes. So final words, gentlemen, before we close out today's show.
I just would be very interested in kind of seeing if it ever gets revealed or discovered as to how this decision got leaked. My understanding is that this has never happened in any of our lifetimes. People are presuming that it was someone on the left, right, who said, you know what, let's expose you and let's not allow this to just quietly go into the night and for a decision to come out, but for people to galvanize people in anticipation of a decision and forcing maybe at least one of these justices to change their mind and wither under the spotlight, if you will. So it's going to be interesting, but I hope this causes people to really look to start organizing and getting active and engaged.
What I would say is that I would say humanity has no boundaries. Somebody thought it was necessary to get this information out in the spirit of humanity. It's no doubt. And so that's what you're going to see. You have decisions that are touching people, affecting people. The word is going to get out. And plus, we do live in a world where, fast, getting information quick is at the forefront of everyone's mind. But I would say humanity led this path and led this charge and led the leak.
Well, this may be the Pentagon Papers moment, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
It may be. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Kevin, Jesse, Roland, everyone catching the replay. We appreciate you being here. And we'll be back again with another show, Speaking Legally, Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard. Bye-bye, everyone.